So you're right that Christians are being called bigots because of their discrimination against sexual minorities, or at least that is the charge. And oftentimes Christians are told that in 100 years, their bigotry will be very similarly viewed as, say, racial bigotry against African Americans, which we know our country has a horrible history of that. So if you're a Christian and you're told, hey, look, you're no better than a Klan member because you are not hiring maybe a gay man to pastor your church, or because you support discrimination against transgender people. You're just like a Klan member. You are practicing something that 100 years your ancestors will be embarrassed to be associated with you. How, as you as a Christian, do you respond to that? I guess you would say equalizing of discrimination based on sexual liberties and discrimination based on racial identity.
Yeah, so there's a Christian sort of theological response. There's also a legal and constitutional response. And since the latter is my area of expertise, I'll start there.
Sure.
And the way this argument is deployed right now. So we're seeing tons of legal conflicts involving religious freedom and LGBTQ rights. This spans the spectrum. It could be employment cases, like you mentioned. I'm representing a religious school right now that declined to renew the contract of a guidance counselor who entered a same-sex marriage in violation of her contract. So you see it in the employment context. You see it in the public accommodations context. I'm representing doctors in hospitals right now where the Biden administration issued a regulation that requires them to perform gender transition procedures like cross-sex surgery in violation of their conscience and medical judgment. And then you see it in the context of like government benefits or contract programs. Like our most recent case at the Supreme Court, the city of Philadelphia cut off a contract with Catholic Charities and tried to shut down a 100-year-old ministry that was recruiting families to provide loving homes for foster children, and said, you guys are a bunch of bigots, we're going to shut you down. So we're seeing these legal conflicts across a wide variety of areas. And then, as you mentioned, one of the main legal arguments we see is, you are discriminating. You're just as bad as people who engaged in race discrimination. Just like you couldn't fire someone for entering an interracial marriage, you shouldn't be able to fire someone for entering a same-sex marriage. Or just like, Catholic Charities in your adoption and foster care ministry, like you couldn't decline to place children in the homes of an interracial couple. You shouldn't be able to place children in the homes of a same-sex couple.
And that's a powerful argument, right? I mean, when you get confronted with that, I think a lot of Christians are caught flat-footed because nobody wants to be, the new Klan member. Nobody wants to enforce a sexual Jim Crow. So, I mean, I think you lay out the problem really well there. And my guess is that most people listening are thinking, yeah, how would I answer that charge? So hopefully you're going to give us a little help.
Yeah. So my expertise is on the legal argument. And as a legal matter, race discrimination has a unique history in our nation. We had over 300 years of slavery based on race. We fought a civil war based on race. We had a systematic government-imposed segregation based on race. And then we had 3 constitutional amendments to address our tragic history of race discrimination. So, the way this played out historically is that African Americans faced systematic government-imposed barriers to full participation in the social, political, and economic life of our community. And because of that unique history, no other group, except perhaps Native Americans, have suffered the way African Americans have. And because of that history, the government is given very unique tools to root out race discrimination, tools that it's not given for any other form of discrimination, whether based on religion, sex, marital status, or anything else. And so you see this reflected in the law. Just one example, like all 50 states have laws banning race discrimination in employment. And there are not really religious exemptions to those laws. Like if you're an employer and you fire someone because of their race and you claim it was a religious belief, you lose. By contrast, when it comes to sexual orientation discrimination, there are only 22 states that right now ban sexual orientation discrimination in their state employment laws. And all 22 of those states have religious exemptions. And this is simply a recognition that different kinds of discrimination warrant different legal treatment. And even the Supreme Court has recognized this. You see this, in the 1967 decision, Loving versus Virginia, where the Supreme Court struck down state bans on interracial marriage. The Supreme Court went out of its way to condemn the beliefs underlying interracial marriage bans as invidious relics of white supremacy. But then fast forward to 2015 in the Obergefell decision, where the Supreme Court struck down traditional marriage laws, and the Supreme Court went out of its way to do the opposite. It said traditional marriage laws are, quote, based on decent and honorable religious and philosophical premises that have long been held and continue to be held in good faith by reasonable and sincere people here and throughout the world. So that's a mouthful, but the Supreme Court is basically saying we recognize that race discrimination and a belief in traditional marriage are very different beings, and the law should treat them differently. So that's the legal response. I'm not a theologian, but we also need, as Christians, to be ready with a theological response, which I think really entails laying out the beauty of how God created us as male and female, and the beauty of human sexuality and its intended good within the bounds of marriage, and be able to speak about that articulately. And then also, as Christians, one of the key moves here is really the need to love our neighbor, and we have not always done that with respect to our LGBTQ neighbors. And that really needs to be first and foremost in our minds, is how do we best love our neighbors, not necessarily how do we win an argument or how do we defend our rights.